Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection, a sense of belonging, and community, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young, licensed clinical social worker. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. This is a weekly podcast where we explore how sensitivity weaves itself into our lives. We talk about the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. Sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. This is episode 17, part 2, with my guest, Dara Hoffman-Fox. Part 1 of this episode was released on Tuesday, and this is a continuation of that conversation. After Dara and I recorded the interview, I had some questions about pronouns, and Dara and I talked about this, so we decided to add a little addendum, which you'll hear at the end of this part of the interview. I end the interview, I say goodbye to Dara, and then I welcome Dara back. I'll tell you, after almost every episode, I think of a handful of things that I wish I would have said. I'm really grateful that Dara was willing to take additional time to come back and record. Actually, we had to do it twice. The first time Dara was in a coffee shop and you could hear the dishes clanging in the background, and we both knew that as highly sensitive people, it would be really distracting to try and hear the conversation around the loud background noise. So we scheduled a third time to record in an attempt to get a better recording. Thank you, Dara. In this episode, Dara defines the term microagressions, and we talk about how this relates to folks who are LGBTQ and how it relates to being a highly sensitive person. Dara talks about how therapists might be committing microaggressions unknowingly with their clients and how this impacts the therapeutic alliance. We go on to discuss how we can articulate our HSP needs so we can function optimally. We also talk about how HSPs tend to be truth tellers. Let me tell you a little bit about Dara. Dara Hoffman-Fox, LPC, is a queer-identified gender therapist in private practice in Colorado Springs, Colorado. As a subject matter expert on transgender and non-binary issues, Dara is the creator of the Conversations with a Gender Therapist YouTube channel, as well as the author of the Amazon #1 bestseller, You and Your Gender Identity, A Guide to Discovery. Dara's goal is to get as much education, resources, and support out there as possible to the trans and gender questioning persons of the world. Through the magic of the internet, Dara is able to do this through their Conversations with a Gender Therapist YouTube channel and Facebook page, media, podcast interviews, and the content you'll find on their website, found at darahoffmanfox.com. If you've been considering therapy but you're not sure if you're ready, I have a couple of thoughts. In bonus episode 32 called, Do Therapists Have Therapists? I talk about the misconceptions about therapy and my beliefs about what therapy is all about. If you live in California and you're curious about telehealth, which means meeting on a platform similar to Skype, but this one is private, I offer a free 20-minute consultation. It can be really scary and intimidating to reach out to a therapist when you're thinking about therapy, which is why I provide a free 20-minute consultation. It gives you a chance to check me out. We can see if we're a good fit. We can talk about your goals. You can see if you think that I'm able to meet the goals that you have. And here's kind of the neat thing. We can meet online on the same platform that we would be doing online therapy with. So you really get a chance to try out this and see what you think about this online stuff. If you're interested, you can go to patriciayounglcsw.com to find out more about the work I do and to get in touch with me. And now, on to the show. Hey, Dara, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
All right. So When we left last, you had just mentioned microaggressions, and I wanted to ask you if you can define what a microaggression is, give an example, and are microaggressions only related to marginalized groups, or in what context can you use that something was a microaggression? I know that's loaded.
Oh, no. I only learned about microaggressions about, I would say about 4 years ago. I made a really good friend who they wrote their dissertation about microaggressions, and they are a therapist. And I was like, wow, this is really too bad that I don't know what this is because this sounds really important. So this has to do with how one of the best ways I've heard microaggression described is it's 1,000 tiny paper cuts. So it could be by the end of your day that you have received, a paper cut maybe in itself is like, ooh, that just hurts a little bit. But if you get 1,000 of them, it's going to just really leave an awful, awful, painful feeling afterwards. So we can use, for instance, myself, what is a way that I could experience a microaggression? So it would be when I am in public and somebody refers to me as ma'am. So there is an assumption that I am a female. And then, so it's like a little tiny paper cut in which I'm like, ooh, I'm not a ma'am. And so later that day, I could have somebody's talking to me and then they say something like, well, all women, or how women, you can relate. Women do such and such, and you can relate to that too. And then I'd be like, ooh, that person didn't see me who I am. And then later on, somebody uses a she or her pronoun for me. There's a little paper cut there. And so over the course of the day, you're receiving a lot of microaggressions. This can happen a lot in counseling sessions, which is something I really try to educate therapists on. And again, we're just talking about, let's say, the non-binary and transgender experience, where there's small things you can do that end up giving the impression that you are not being sensitive to that person's experience. And oftentimes, one of the deeper solutions to that is to recognize, in this case, it would be what certain privileges you have. So in this case, if you're cisgender, which means you do align with your gender assigned at birth, there's stuff about the transgender experience you don't know, you don't understand it, you're not going to get it, you're not going to think about it. And therefore, you're going to say things that probably come across as insensitive. And every time that happens, there's a it's not an aggression, but it's a small aggression. And therefore, over time, it really builds up. And so, like you said, this is something that is experienced by people who are definitely of different races. They experience this tremendously in their daily lives, obviously depending on who they spend time with and what parts of the country they live in. But this is something that they can really, really relate to because of how frequently it can happen.
Sure. And I was thinking, as highly sensitive people, we get it all day long too of, stop being so sensitive. You've got such thin skin, you need to toughen up. Those to me are microaggressions.
That's a really good point, because I heard you ask about, what are the different types of groups? And in this case, being highly sensitive, I would agree. I can reflect back to over the years in which when I didn't know I was highly sensitive and receiving that sort of information and then really feeling shameful about it. And that's what microaggressions can really lead to.
Yeah, stop worrying about it. You think too much, you worry too much. Yeah, I think it is the same thing. Well, thank you. That's really helpful. Why is it called cisgender? And if anybody hasn't heard that term before, it's CIS. What does that mean? I mean, you defined it, but why is it cisgender?
It's a Latin prefix, and I want to say it means something like same or aligned. So really it's because it's a Latin prefix and you put it in front of the word gender. So it means pretty much like you do feel in line with, or it is the same. The gender that you were assigned at birth based on the appearance of your genitalia is the same as your gender identity. And therefore you are cisgender. And then trans in its most basic form means across. And so that can then mean there, again, trans and transgender have been really been morphed over the years in terms of when are they used and in what context, but it indicates that you are not aligned with your gender assigned at birth.
That makes so much sense. The transgender I understood, but I never understood cis, and it made it really hard for me to relate and connect. So that makes total sense. I have a question for you, and I don't know if there's an answer to this. Is it harder for parents to use their child's pronouns than other people in that person's life? Am I being clear?
Oh yeah, you are. I don't work very often with kids or with teenagers, but when I have, and I also don't do family therapy. And so there's been a couple.
Even adults, I mean.
I see what you're saying. I have seen a lot of clients who have definitely had challenges because, for one, their parents have known them for the longest amount of time. Maybe if they have siblings who are close in age, they would kind of come in a second place, being able to do that. Parents also can be really attached to the names and that they have given to their kids. They put a lot of time and thought into what that should be. And so, which is kind of a funny concept when you think about it, like for anybody, even who's not transgender, like you're given a name and then it's like you hope that your kid likes it as they get older or they look like that name or fit into that. So I've even told my daughter, like, if you ever want to change your name, it won't hurt my feelings. Like she's cisgender, but she's like, no, I'm fine with it. Funny enough, I gave her a gender neutral name of Tyler when she was born, and I wasn't even aware of anything transgender back then. And so she has grown into it. At first it was hard for her because people a lot of times would assume if they hadn't met her that she was a boy. So yeah, but if she changed her name, I know it definitely would take me some time because just of the repetitiveness of just having said her name and just it embodies her. You have to really take a big step back to be able to do that. And it means, so it does, it's one of those things where for my clients, it means so much to them if they're able to let their parents know, like, I'm going to change my name. And I would, I know this probably is really bad news for you, and I'm sorry. It's kind of that feeling that I have where I'm like, I'm sorry, but I know this is going to be hard, but this is really important to me. When their parents do say, give us some time, we're probably going to mess up, but absolutely, like this is your true name, and we're going to make sure we use it. And then is on the other side extremely devastating if they have parents who they just flat out reject that and refuse to acknowledge them by their chosen name.
Sure. It's interesting. I had a client who had, so help me out, who has a daughter who's transgender. Mm-hmm. And we did a session where we brought the daughter in because the daughter wanted to talk to my client about some issues. And my client still continues to use male pronouns with her daughter. And so I had asked the daughter, how is that for you? Daughter was okay with it. And after this session and the client and I continued to process, I had to own the fact that it's really important for me to use your daughter's pronouns because if she joins us again, I want my mind to be trained to be respectful of the pronouns that your daughter wants. So it's interesting to be having a conversation with my client, and my client chooses to use the pronouns that her child was born with, and it was important for me to use the daughter's pronouns.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, I think you handled that so well.
Well, and I had to own that, it's like a rule. I want to follow the rules.
Yes.
And so when the daughter said, I'm fine with mom referring to me how she refers to me, okay, I can let go of that rule. But I found myself but we have to follow the rules.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a really great example of how just trying to hold space for everything and everybody in the room in that case. And yeah, I've been in that situation before where I'll say something similar where I'll say, so even though you'll be referring to your child, or sometimes I'll have couples, in couples counseling, you're going to be using this pronoun, but at this point I'm used to this is what I'm going to use, and want to check in with everybody to see how that's going to feel. Because yeah, you're saying okay, this is, you're in this space where you're not ready to start using these pronouns, and the person says that they're okay and they understand that, but here I am wanting to go, I'm meeting you in this kind of space. So that's really all you can do is just be honest and share that, and then check in with everybody, right, just like you did.
Right. I think that transparency of just checking in with people is so, so important.
Yeah, especially that's the thing I try to remind therapists and especially, is that you already have certain skills that are really going to come in useful in this. And that's one of the things you already bring into the room, is that ability to do that.
Hmm. Yay. Okay. So is there anything else about non-gendered language, transgender, non-binary that we want to talk about, or do you want to transition into the little wrap-up HSP questions?
I cannot think of anything else.
Okay. Do you want to just jump into the questions then?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Dara, what are some of the challenges that you experience as a highly sensitive person?
I would say, kind of like I mentioned earlier, is that I've noticed that when it comes to me requiring, kind of like, I'm a plant and I need, what is my water and my sunlight? I really have to be careful about making sure I get good quality sleep, and whether that means I'm traveling or being at home or staying at somebody else's place, sometimes that will influence my decision as to whether or not I can go somewhere. That is something that I feel very challenged by and want to definitely be learning more. So because I don't want to have that inhibit my ability to be able to function. But I just know I get it. It's the way my nervous system is built, and it's just how much information have I taken in during a day. So I say that's one of the big challenges, because I really want to be able to do more public speaking around the country, maybe even the world, and give trainings and presentations and workshops. But I'm not going to be able to do that unless me and my HSP self can get on the same page. I also have dietary restrictions, and therefore, you mentioned about your friend, there's going to be certain ways I need to prepare for that, either myself or ahead of time. This is kind of a funny story, but I'm going to be speaking at a conference in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and one of the people mentioned that I could stay at her farmhouse during the time, and I sent this really long email back about like everything that I would require to make sure I had a comfortable night's sleep. And I think I learned that from one of your episodes, where you were sharing something, along the lines of like, sometimes you just need to then start letting people know, like, well, here's what I'm going to require to be comfortable. And that can be hard because, I'm not trying to be special or try to say that, because you've hired me, I'm going to make all these requirements. And because there's, just because, it's really because I need to be able to function while I'm at your conference. And here's what needs to be at place. And if not, I have to have a hotel room. And for me to be able to put that forward and say it, like I said, I feel like there's different ways your podcast has really empowered me more. And so as I look at the things that are big challenges to me, then knowing that I need to be able to start verbalizing this, I would say, I kind of like went out of the question of what's most challenging, but I think I'm just trying to remind myself that even though those are challenges, that this is sort of new for me to be speaking up about them when I feel like I could get some external help with it.
Sure. And I think what happens is that it's easy for us to go into that self-talk or narrative of I'm being too picky, but it's like, or that we're making demands, and really we're just getting clear on these are the things that I need. These are deal breakers. I'm letting you know what I need. If you can't meet my needs, I'm really okay with that, but I need to go to a place where I can get those needs met, because if you want me to function well, these are the things that I need. And I really am hoping that as we have more of these conversations, people can take that framework of, I'm just getting clear on what I need. If you can't give it to me, I'm okay with that, but I need to get these needs met.
Right. Yes, exactly. So that way it still is an engaged dialogue, because, I wanted to let them know in this example, I really appreciated their hospitality. And I said, so like, let's start with me actually staying there. And let me ask you, are you able to provide all these requirements? And if not, I totally understand. And I'm sorry, it's going to be another expense, but it's just how it'll have to be. So that's the first time I finally kind of like put that forward in that way. I always ask for a box fan whenever I go to I'm speaking somewhere. And I'm like, does anybody there have a box fan I can put in my hotel room? Because I really need that white noise. It took me a long time to figure that out. But once I did, I kind of don't ever want to be without it. But it's a little hard to travel with a box fan on an airplane. So I would say, yeah. And I've been doing that more with my partner now, and just we've been together almost 12 years, so she definitely has seen proof over time, like, wow, like you really are more sensitive to sound and to noise and to sound and noise, to light, and not getting enough sleep, not eating right. Like it took a while for her to really see it, but so kind of like through proof, she has seen it. And then so therefore I am able to make some stipulations and say, ooh, I think that might, overextend me and whatnot. And so that's been really nice that I feel like, because she's not a highly sensitive person in that respect. She is moderately sensitive, but there's certain ways that she definitely is like, wow, that is so different than I am. And being able to accommodate me, though, that's been really nice.
Yeah, I bet. What do you do for play?
I've heard you ask people that, and I am going to be one of those people that says that this is a hard question. Being able to, I guess, allow myself to fit play into my life is not something I have been very good at for a few years now. So it did make me kind of think about, like, even what is it that I would consider to be play right now at this point in my life. One thing I know that I'm somewhat putting off play or exploring that more is because my daughter is a senior in high school, and when she starts college next fall, I know I'm going to have some more opportunity maybe to have a more regular schedule. One thing that I piqued my interest, for instance, is I like the idea of being involved in team sports again, like with grown-ups. So there was like some kind of kickball league that was organizing, and it was also LGBT kickball. And I was like, wow, that sounds perfect, but it was just at a time I wasn't going to be able to go. So I'm taking note of things that seems like they would be of interest. I feel like there's different ways I want to get back into moving my body and using my body. I'd like to join CrossFit, anything that I feel like would kind of make me feel like I'm an athlete, but in ways that I didn't do as a kid, potentially just because I constricted myself as being female and I wanted to play on the boys basketball team but wasn't allowed to, and things like that. As an adult, I can now reclaim some of those things. So I would say if there's something I'd like to incorporate more, I'll do that. But in the meantime, I do love going to the movies. I made sure on Thursday night, after I had the experience where I was feeling fatigued from trying to get my gender marker changed on my license, I decided it was a good night to go to the movies. So that's really one of my favorite ways. It's not necessarily play, but to me it feels like I'm really treating myself when I do that.
Well, and part of what I wonder is how we define play. And I'm really starting to wonder about what the connection is between play and spontaneity and losing our inhibition, physical exercise, being in our bodies. I think I said that twice. If there's a relationship with all of those things, because I think that we do play and it's often more intellectual stimulation or movies for escape or for more stimulation. But I am wondering about this mind-body connection and if that's just part of how we're wired. Like, I don't know, but I'm just fascinated by it.
That's a good point. I've heard some of your other guests answer the question and say, I don't know if this is play or not, but I'll curl up with a good book or I'll study something. I mean, to me, just like reading about being an HSP, for instance, is like, wow, I'm going to take some time to do something enjoyable. I'm going to read about being an HSP. That's just the way I define it.
Yeah. What are some of your superpowers being a highly sensitive person?
I would say they definitely come into play being a therapist. And so there's and I want to be careful not to mix it up with being extroverted, introverted, because now I don't know for sure what I am, but I feel like I have a finely tuned intuition, and therefore being able to pick up on subtleties, which I do know is a highly sensitive person quality. I think that really is very helpful. And that's something that, let's say it is a superpower, like when I use it in my personal life, it might not always make the person happy that I'm recognizing and picking up on things they're not ready to share, or maybe they haven't realized in themselves yet. But to me, being that highly perceptive, I think I've finally gotten to the point where I can see that being really cool. I also really am attentive and attuned to how people are feeling. I've heard you say this about yourself and your family too, where I'm also, my zodiac sign is Cancer. And so I like to make sure people are comfortable, and I want to have the right music on and set the mood, and what kind of food do you want? Is the temperature right? I think that's something that if you mix that in together, those two qualities of my zodiac sign and also being HSP, I think I can be a really good host, whether it's even for a party or if it's even just for my family. Those are the kind of things that I find bring me great joy, to be able to provide that to people that I know not everybody can.
Yeah. I think highly sensitive people, we really tend to be the truth tellers. I don't know if this is true. My guess is that this is true for therapists. It's probably true for other people. I just don't know. But it's interesting. This last week, I was reflecting on the sessions that I had, and my clients felt uncomfortable because of things that we talked about, not so uncomfortable that they don't want to come back, but I feel like I really have a gift of being able to shine light on the truth in a way that feels loving and supportive and caring. And even though my clients go like, ew, this is uncomfortable, that's part of why they come to therapy, because they want to grow and they want to see the blind spots. And I think that we really do have the ability to see and pick up on things that not everybody does.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was thinking about that recently, about being a truth teller, because I have to recognize that when, especially in my personal life, there'll be times where I will be going to let's say a family gathering or something's happening, and I know that there's secrets being kept or everybody's just not being real or authentic, and it's really frustrating to me, and I kind of try to push for it. And this is something where, I've been reminded, for instance, what, this is just not how this family, not my family, but like this other family I'm going to spend time with, this is just not how we function. Like, this has been our way for years. We just don't go deep. We just don't go there. And I have to recognize and respect the fact that even though I just think that's like, how can you exist in that way? That's because this is how I exist, and that's how they're going to exist. And for me to be able to find a way for me to still be a truth teller in that space without feeling like I'm sacrificing some part of myself. This is very new revelation for me, to try to figure out how to do that, to know that it's not just about me, but it's also, I still want to be able to be me in those situations.
Sure. What would you want to tell your younger self about being a highly sensitive person?
I think that I did not receive the proper sort of attention that a highly sensitive child should receive. And I listened to your episode where you were talking with someone who works with highly sensitive kids, and it made me think a lot about myself in that space. I liked how you all were talking about not having the language of emotion, because that really resonated with me. I feel like I had two parents and a step parent, and I feel like, especially my parents, they just did not have the language of emotion. And so for me, I really ended up repressing my emotion, because I thought that was just the way you were supposed to function. So I was really out of touch with my emotions for a very long time. It's something I'm only probably relearning through therapy for the last few years. And so it's a little bit of a hot mess for a bit, because all along I've been a highly sensitive person, and yet was not supported or encouraged as a child. And, my parents didn't know. So I would want to go back and tell my younger self more about that and say, this is the type of person you are, and here's the wonderful gifts about it. Here's where there are going to be some challenges. But, please try not to hide this part of yourself from yourself, because it's going to take a long time to release the shame around that and unrepress it. So I feel like that's what I'd like to tell young Dara.
Got it. And the episode that you referred to is episode 13 with Megan Thompson. It's called Parenting Your Highly Sensitive Child Like a Ninja, just in case anybody's curious.
Yeah, it has some really good stuff in that.
Is there anything else about being a highly sensitive person that I didn't ask you that you want to talk about?
I think the only other thing is what I alluded to earlier, is how interesting it was to hear you talk about, when your guest, about being a highly sensitive extrovert. And again, that is just something that, for some reason, when I heard that, it's kind of the same thing like when I finally heard the word non-binary. Something about that just felt like I might have just gotten an answer to a question that I've been wondering about myself, and I didn't even know I had a question about it. I'm definitely in the exploratory stage of trying to just kind of feel that out when it comes to, maybe I'm not an INFJ, and maybe I'm a highly sensitive ENFJ. And, again, I'm grateful for the help you've been giving me with that, because I feel like that is going to be, I already can tell, even, whenever, regardless of how it turns out, there's something about my extroverted qualities and tendencies that perhaps have then also been misunderstood by myself. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing if there's some deeper understanding I'm going to have of myself. So that's something I'd want to be sure to mention to your audience, because to me that was just so interesting and something really worth exploring.
And the article that you're referring to, well, you didn't refer to it. The article that I'm referring to, you can go to, I'll put it in the show notes, but if you go to hsperson.com, I think it's called Introvert, Extrovert, and the Highly Sensitive Person, and it's written by Jacqueline Strickland. And on the Myers-Briggs, I took it years ago. I tested as an INFJ. The I is for introvert. I don't think that the Myers-Briggs factors in highly sensitive person. And so, you can be an INFJ and still be a highly sensitive extrovert because it doesn't factor in for, I just said that. I'm just repeating myself.
Oh, no, for some reason I got it, though, the second time you said it.
Okay.
I don't know. It was meant to be.
Okay.
I was like, oh, I see what you're saying now.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Do you want to tell us about any projects that you're working on?
Right now, a lot of my energy is being spent towards educating therapists on how to be more transgender friendly and to feel more aware and feel more confident in their abilities to work with clients who are gender questioning and non-binary and transgender. So I can send you a link. I have an online academy where you can take courses to learn more about this. And so far I only have one course up, and it's about working with non-binary clients, but I'm in the process of kind of taking a step back and making more of a 101 sort of course. The cool thing about this is I can really repurpose it, which is great for in terms of my energy being expended as a highly sensitive person. I'm putting a lot of time and energy into making this, but now I can put it online and offer it to people there. I can take it to conferences, and then I can locally, go to different mental health agencies and show it to them. And so I'm really excited because every time I come out with a new course, I feel like, it gets to kind of like live and breathe for a while, because I put a lot of creative energy into it. I'm really into graphic design and making, kind of like the same thing I was talking about, creating the right environment. I want my actual Google Slides to look inviting and exactly get across what I want. And so I put a lot of heart into those different presentations. And so I would say that would be a pretty good way to kind of get to know what I'm doing. Yeah, so I would say that's the main project that I'm working on, which kind of can branch out into me being able to offer these courses at different trainings and conferences as well.
I could hear the excitement in your voice when you were talking about designing slides and the creativity. I think that's part of how you play.
Oh, good call. That is strange. I was like, I just got excited.
Yeah, I could hear it. I could hear it in your voice.
Thanks for pointing that out. So maybe now I know if something like I start getting excited talking about it, I can pause and say like, oh, do I feel like I'm actually like doing something that feels playful at this point?
Yeah, well, and I think when we use our creativity, even if it's in an intellectual way, I think that's still play for us. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Where can people find you?
Well, like I mentioned, I'd be happy to connect on Facebook through my regular Facebook page under Dara Hoffman-Fox. I also have a page, Facebook, called Conversations with a Gender Therapist, which also has my name on it. So I have both a page and my personal profile. You'll be able to tell the difference. One of the ones you can like, one of the ones you can send me a friend request. You're going to put in the notes how you can access my YouTube channel, which I have about 5 years now, probably worth of videos that explore all sorts of different questions that people have about being trans and transgender. And it's really cool because in the earlier videos, I look totally different. I sound totally different because I've been through my own transition through being non-binary in terms of my appearance and even the way that I talk and gesture. It's very interesting to watch over time. Let's see. Yeah, Facebook, YouTube are great places to get a hold of me. I have a website, darahoffmanfox.com, and there's a specific place on there for those of you who are therapists that you can access, and it shows you a lot of the videos and blog posts that I've done to be helpful for therapists. You can find out about consultation with me and sign up for a newsletter there.
All right. Dara, this has been just an amazing conversation. It's funny, I usually take copious notes when we talk, and I was so into the conversation and just being in the moment and taking in the information that it's it's going to be hard editing because I'm going to have to be writing notes. But I just noticed that I was so enraptured in what we were talking about that the part of my brain that could observe and take notes just kind of went offline.
I'm so happy to hear that. I mean, I'm sorry about your extra work, but I'm really glad to hear that this was engaging for you, and hope your audience feels the same way.
Yeah, thank you so much for your willingness to come on and just provide some information and education. And I thank you. I'm just so grateful. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you too. I mean, like I've referred to your own podcast probably a dozen times in our own interview. So I am really, really grateful for the work you're doing as well.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, Dara, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Hey, Dara, welcome back.
Thanks, Patricia. No problem.
It's not uncommon for me to record an episode and then I have all these thoughts about what I want to say after the episode is released. And we had a little bit of a conversation after we recorded, which is why we're jumping back on today. So thank you for taking the time to come back.
Yes, I agree that this is well worth following up on.
Absolutely. And it's something that I'm really not comfortable speaking to. And I feel like it's, I want to stay in my own lane. So again, thanks for coming back. The first thing is, can we revisit pronouns?
Sure. What in particular were you thinking?
Well, you and I had a conversation offline about that there may be other instances where people have, whether we say chosen pronouns or preferred pronouns, that there may be times when we want to language that differently.
Yeah, and actually it was one of the things that really spurned the conversation between us afterwards is that even though during our interview I had mentioned that potentially somebody could use the phrasing chosen pronouns instead of preferred pronouns, just this very week I learned that actually isn't suggested anymore. And I say anymore because it was several years during which people were using the phrase preferred pronouns, and then people started trying to shift that to something more like chosen pronouns. And so this is kind of a good example of something that shows just how much the language is still being explored and experimented with. And so I definitely wanted to follow up to make sure we clarified a bit when it comes to talking about pronouns. Even if you're asking somebody, what are your pronouns? That's really all you have to ask. You don't have to put the word preferred or chosen. You can just say, hi, what are your pronouns? And obviously, if this is a business situation, you could put it on your intake paperwork. You can ask it in an email exchange or a messenger exchange. But really feeling like this was a great example to talk about, in which how even something I said just probably 3 days after our interview, I was in a Facebook group of other therapists where we talk about this kind of thing. And I was like, oh, you know what? That makes sense. That is now something that I'm going to make sure I don't say anymore. And so now I'm going to make sure I let other people know that is true as well.
Right. And my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it makes it sound like it's about choice and preference as opposed to I'm a female and there's not a lot of wiggle room around that. So yeah. My pronouns are she and her, and it's not that I prefer that you use them. Like, this is who I am. And so it's really important to use language that's in alignment with how I identify myself.
Yeah, I think it can get tricky where people are still trying to figure out how to word this is that somebody who's trans was assigned a gender at birth and therefore assigned potentially the wrong pronouns at birth. And so they've been using these pronouns that they don't align with. And so at a certain point in time, they recognize that this is true. And then they want everybody to start using the right pronouns for them. So it's like, how do you describe that this is something that this person, this did not used to be their pronouns, but now these are their pronouns. And there's only certain circumstances that probably has to come up in. It would be maybe in situations where, for, let's say, legal purposes, if your name or pronouns aren't changed legally yet, you might have to do this before and after explanation. Medical situations, maybe even in mental health counseling, if it's relevant. And so there's still sometimes a need to be able to explain to somebody, this is who I thought I was and who people thought I was, but this is actually who I am. And so what are the transition words that are used during that? So that's something I think that people are still contemplating and working on.
Sure. I'm good on the pronouns. Is there anything else that you wanted to say about it?
No, I think that covers that part of what we had talked about.
Dara, you had some thoughts about how the information that you shared on this podcast and how it relates, kind of you being a spokesperson in a sense. What did you want to share about that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that, I am talking about some information here that it's really, part of it is my own experience in the world as a non-binary person, but I'm only one individual who's having this experience. And I also am speaking as a gender therapist and an educator. But again, this kind of information and education is going to be different depending on who's presenting it to you. There's a certain amount of intersectionality that I do have, but that I also don't have. I'm not speaking from the perspective of somebody who is a person of color, for instance. And there's going to be information that's going to be shared. Not that I would not be sharing that information, but from that personal experience level, it's really important to remember that there's so many different other experiences that people who are trans are having. And even as a trans educator, there's going to be different things that I've learned that I have sort of formed opinions around that I'm going to be sharing. But don't be surprised if you hear perhaps somebody else talking about this and they may say something that almost sounds like maybe it even contradicts what I'm saying.
Sure. And we all have our own take on things. There is no universal truth, no universal standard. So, of course, there's going to be some variation, but I understand why you would want to clarify that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then there was an article that you found.
Yeah, there's an article written by Alex Capitan, and it's called The Radical Copywriter's Style Guide for Writing About Transgender People. And I believe Alex started writing this because they noticed that in the news, whether it was local news or national news even, there were misphrasings that were happening when people were trying to report on transgender news. So this article, even though it's geared towards for those purposes, I think it's excellent for anybody really to read and kind of get really caught up to speed about where things are at. And Alex ends up revising this probably every 3 months or so, because that's how often language is changing and evolving. And so for me, even when I read the latest update of this, which just came out within the last couple of weeks, it presented a couple of things that I hadn't thought about or I hadn't realized the vernacular had changed, and really gave me a chance to sit back and revisit what it is I've learned and then ask myself, okay, does this feel like it fits in with what I've learned so far? And Alex is really on the ball when it comes to talking about this. And so I feel like I trust Alex as a source, which is really important to do nowadays, is make sure you trust your source. And so I do trust the source very much, which is why I wanted to share it with you. So you could share it with your audience and they could take a look at this. This kind of takes you to maybe the next level of understanding and awareness about the type, being aware of language use.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And the final point that we had talked about was it's possible to get so wrapped up in getting the language right that we miss the relationship with the person. So do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think one thing that actually made me think of that is something that Alex mentioned in this article, which is they are really wanting everybody to understand the information in it, but they started the article saying, make sure you don't care more about words than you do about people. And I think that can be something that's forgotten. Whatever relationship you have with the person, perhaps who is gender questioning or trans, whoever you're interacting with, you really need to start with the relationship you have with that person. If you already have a really comfortable, open, trusting relationship, even though some of the discussion about language might be challenging, more than likely it's going to go pretty well because you already have a method of communication that works. And if you are talking to somebody that you don't know very well, or maybe you haven't figured out your communication dance together, or maybe it just doesn't go well, it's probably just not going to go well in general because of that. Putting extra pressure on oneself to make sure the language is correct. I can definitely understand where that's coming from, especially if you're just getting to know somebody, such as a client. But if that person can tell you're coming from a place of that you care and that you want to be respectful and that you are going to work hard on knowing what their language is that they feel most comfortable with you using, then that's really what's going to shine through the most.
Yeah, I think relationship, when we remember that we are just humans and we're having a relationship between two humans, and that's what the focus is. The rest are details. They're important details, and it's important to respect people. But I think it's easy to get hung up about the rules and the language, and we kind of miss the connection.
Yeah, it's tricky to find that balance between being just informed enough so that you don't maybe misstep, even with somebody you have a close relationship with, too far and say something that potentially is really hurtful. Trying to find that balance to make sure you know just enough, but then you can also trust the relationship enough that the rest will fall into place.
Yeah. I know my style doesn't fit for everybody, but I'm really all about being transparent and saying, kind of like I did with you, I want to get it right. I'm struggling. If I get it wrong, can you please gently correct me? Then it's out there on the table and you know what my intentions are. Then we can focus on the relationship and do the adjustments as we need. That doesn't work for everybody, but that's my suggestion.
Well, and like we talked about before, I think this is a good example that maybe we've shown the listeners as to how this is something that you can do yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Dara, is there anything else before we go?
No, but I do really appreciate having this platform to be able to share this information. It's my life's work, and it's really important to me to get this out there. And I think I really like how this went. So I appreciate it very much.
You're really welcome. Thanks again for taking the time to jump back on, actually, for a third time since the second recording didn't work.
No problem.
Have a great day, Dara.
You too, Patricia.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. If you're enjoying this podcast, please rate and review. It makes the podcast easier for others to find. You can rate it on your iPhone in the podcast app, or you can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com and click on one of the more recent episodes, and there are instructions and links in the show notes so you can rate this podcast. If you have questions or comments, I love hearing from you. Please reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. We have a closed Facebook group called Unapologetically Sensitive, where we're building a great community. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.